I'm here today with Robert Goolrick. We're talking about his new book, Heading Out to Wonderful, and all of your books and your life story. But I was thinking about your life story, and you penned a memoir about it, The End of the World as You Know It. And you know, all that you've gone through in your life, some would be institutionalized with some of the things that have happened to you. You've overcome great odds. Why is it that you think that some can go down one path and kind of fail, and others can succeed despite having those types of circumstances, become a very successful advertising executive, then go on to write novels? How did you overcome all of those odds?
I think that, I had a strong imagination. I had a very strong interior life. I have a very strong spiritual life, if not religious life, and I was institutionalized. So with all of those things, it makes for a very strong character, I think. And when it came time for me to write, I certainly had things to write about.
So are you one of the people who believes everything happens for a reason, that you kind of adopted all of that into your brain?
Well, I certainly think that everything happened to me in such a way that it all turned out for the best. I get a lot of letters from people for whom it has not turned out for the best. And one of the great things about writing The End of the World as We Know It is the number of people who write me and say that it gives them some kind of comfort, it gives them some kind of hope to see that you can have these experiences as children and that you can nevertheless go on and lead a life. And many of them say that because they've read The End of the World as We Know It, it makes them value the lives of their own children even more deeply than they did before. That's the thing, of all my writing, I think that's the thing I'm proudest of.
Well, you've had this great career. Right before writing these novels and writing your memoir, you were in advertising. You were an advertising executive. You were copywriting and all of those things. How did that influence your writing?
Well, I think advertising takes people who have talent but no specific ambition and uses the talent in very, very specific ways. When I was young, I suppose I had a good deal of talent, some talent and some imagination, but I didn't really have any direction. I didn't know where I wanted to go. And advertising was simply a way to make a living. But it taught me a lot about the nature of writing an economical sentence, and it taught me a lot about taking a vast amount of material and condensing it into the smallest and most impactful form. And I think that when it came time to actually write books, that learning really helped me a lot. And people can laugh at advertising all they want to, but I think it does teach you really how to write if you pay attention. But the important thing when you write is that you have to have, you need to have something to say, something of value to say. But when you do, it's good to have technique to be able to say it with.
To rely on. Well, you obviously had a major shift from advertising into writing. Why did you take that directional shift? What happened that
I got suddenly and vertiginously fired from advertising at the age of 54, and I had to think of something to do with the rest of my life. And I suppose people had always said to me that I should be a writer, which sounds great in practice, in theory, but is much more difficult in practice than it really sounds. But I needed something to do, and I needed to reinvent myself. And so writing was my way out of the wasteland that I found myself in at the age of 54.
So being fired was actually a good thing.
Being fired was a great thing. It was just a great thing because I think it's a terrific thing to change your life in your 50s. You know, to reinvent yourself, to take everything you've learned and use it to become something else, something better, something that makes you happier, something that is more giving to the world. So I think it was a great thing that happened to me.
Unfortunately, too many people have gone through that and maybe struggle, but it's great to see that was a successful
I'm an extremely lucky person.
That's terrific. And, well, your first novel, A Reliable Life, New York Times #1 bestseller, incredible success, great reviews. It was a terrific book. And now this next book, which is also terrific, most people, this will be their first exposure to hearing about it. How was writing that second novel? Was it harder for you, the burden of having such a successful first novel? It's not like you wrote it and kind of just got it out there and then maybe...
Well, everybody tells you about the sophomore slump, and it couldn't be truer. You get overwhelmed with fear. And I think part of the fear is that you really honestly do want to write a better book than your first book. You're not sort of overwhelmed or puffed up with your own success, because to me, it seems such a miraculous thing that Reliable Wife became such a success. And I live very far. I live in a little tiny town in the middle of nowhere. So I was very far from the kind of literary life that might make you think you were all great and wonderful for having a book on the bestseller list in the New York Times. But the truth is that it was harder because one, Heading Out to Wonderful is about real people. It's a real story that actually happened, and I felt a great responsibility to them. And also because I think that when you write a second book, you honestly want to make it a better book.
And it is terrific. And the first book, Reliable Wife, I understand that the minute you finished the manuscript, you handed it to your agent, and it was just sold immediately and just took off.
So
right?
not true.
Not true,
So
right?
deeply
What really
and
happened?
importantly
Because I love
not
that
true.
story.
I gave the book to my agent, and and she said, I can sell this book in 10 days. This is a blockbuster book. It's really going to be great. I can sell it in 10 days. 2.5 years later, she came back to me, and she had had rejection letters from 36 publishers, and she told me that there were no publishers left. She couldn't think of anybody to send it to. And it was only by accident. So I had written, in the meantime, I had written The End of the World as We Know It, and I said, well, you might as well try to sell that. And she did to Algonquin in 10 days. And Algonquin then took another look at Reliable Wife, which they had already rejected, and said, yes, maybe we'll publish that book after all. And I think we're all glad they did.
It worked out.
It worked out fine for everybody.
Quite well. Well, I don't want to give away the plot of this book, but you did say it was based on a true story. Tell us about the origins. Where did you hear that story? How did it come about? You changed it, obviously.
I heard the story in Greece. I lived in Greece for a time, and I have been back any number of times. And I had heard in this little town in which I lived that there was only one crime that was ever committed, and that a friend of mine, a man who is actually older than I am, was involved in it when he was a little boy. And so I asked him to tell me the story, and he did. He told me the story 25 years ago. And I've thought about it all that time, and when it came time to write it, and when he told it to me, I thought to myself, this is the best story I've ever heard. And so I've thought about it for easily 25 years. And when it came time to write a second novel, this was the story I wanted to tell. It was in many ways exciting because it is truly a great story, and in other ways it was very daunting because you want to be very honorable to the people who were involved, some of whom are still living. I set the story not in Greece but in a small town in Virginia because I grew up in Virginia, and I know the people, and I know the land, and I know the music, and anybody who's read any of my books can tell you that the setting of the book is very important, almost like another character. In Reliable Wife, it was northern Wisconsin in the middle of the winter. In Heading Out to Wonderful, it's Virginia, mostly in the summertime. So I wanted it to be, if I was going to tell an exotic story, I wanted it to be in a very familiar and understandable, graspable location.
Well, you have themes that kind of come out. Some of them seem somewhat autobiographical, suffering and endurance and tragic love, and yet the books are very different. And the season is one step, but the whole, there's a difference that you feel in starting with the seasons. How would you contrast the two novels?
Well, in contrasting the two novels, I would say that Reliable Wife is a winter novel. It's very much affected by the weather, and it takes place in the dead of winter. Heading Out to Wonderful is very much a summer novel. It has a much more lush and fertile feeling than Reliable Wife, which I think is a very austere and gothic kind of novel. This is a much lusher, greener, and more approachable kind of naturalism, I think.
It's very interesting. I want to turn to one of the characters. There's this child, and I don't want to talk about all the specifics of it, but Sam, at the very end of the book is grown up and he's kind of looking back at all that's happened in this incredible story. And he's kind of enduring all of that and kind of accepting of all of that. How much of that is you looking back over your own life and all that you've endured and kind of accepted?
People always ask a writer which character is him. In Reliable Wife, I used to say that all of the characters were me. If you combine the characters, that they formed a self-portrait of me. It is very clear to me in Heading Out to Wonderful that Sam is me, and that I, like he, am looking back on a life in which certain things have happened, and in which the predominant thing that's happened is that the innocence of childhood was damaged and lost at a very early age, and what the effect of that is, and how you live with it, and what the ramifications of it are. So in this case, I would say that yes, I am happily Sam.
And in that same emotional state, which was so powerful at the end, it was a terrific way.
Well, I think that I through the medium of writing have survived it better than Sam has in the book. Being able, when I was young, I used to have a nightmare all the time. And the nightmare was that there was something terribly wrong with me, something hurt. And I would open my mouth to tell my mother or whoever was around that something was wrong with me, and nothing would come out. I was mute. In writing, I have found a way to break that muteness and to find a voice. And I think the sad thing in Heading Out to Wonderful is that Sam really never does find a voice. He lives a life that doesn't quite belong to him, even to the very end. My life now, because of the miracle of writing these books, very much belongs to me.
Well, you certainly have found your voice. Both of these books really speak to you. You can kind of hear you telling that story so richly, and they're so powerful. So I appreciate you coming in to talk about that.
Thanks so much.
And for all of them, it's really very, very beautiful writing, and I'm sure people will see that as they read this. So congratulations on your next book.
Thanks.